get your certificate to you faster. So I do want to welcome everyone today to our CLE event with Michael Strautmanis. First, I would like to introduce you to Greg Mierecki. Greg is our Executive Assistant Dean for Career Planning and Professional Development here at the University of Illinois College of Law. Greg also is the director of our Leadership Project, which is a fantastic program for our students. Greg is going to introduce our guest speaker today, and he will take it from there.
Heather, thank you, and welcome once again to all of our alumni and friends from around the world. We're here today to talk about President Obama's book, Promised Land. Here it is, and in case you're wondering, if you haven't gotten through it yet, it's a pretty significant volume. It's 1,067 pages, and we're going to talk about the leadership lessons that come from President Obama's book today. We are very excited to welcome back Michael Strautmanis. He is a proud double Illini of class of 1994 with the JD, and he also has a bachelor's degree from the University of Illinois. Currently, he serves as Executive Vice President of External Affairs for the Obama Foundation. Prior to that engagement, as many of you know, he worked in Washington, D.C. for a period of time. He served in the Obama White House for 4 years. He was part of the Walt Disney Corporation, the senior leadership of Walt Disney Corporation, and he was also on Senator Obama's congressional staff, campaign, and subsequent transition team. So, Michael, welcome back. We are delighted to have you, and we're excited to get some kind of inside look at some of the topics that President Obama raised in his book. So we're going to start. We're going to talk about 10 different leadership lessons that you can see from President Obama's book. If you have not read the book completely, I recommend it, but you don't need to have read the book in order to get some value out of this. I think you're going to enjoy the conversation. So Mike, the first thing that I noticed in the book was President Obama's desire to deliver an energizing vision, right? And so, yes, we can is really kind of the three-word catchphrase that many of us think about. Is that something that you noticed during President Obama's tenure? And can you give us a couple of other examples of that?
Yeah, well, Greg, thanks for doing this. Hope everybody, Greg, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're
Great.
good.
It's always good to be reconnected with alma mater, with the University of Illinois at the law school. So I just wanted to say that I've enjoyed working with you on this project. I think the other thing I would say is that I just want to give a little bit of a context or spoiler alert. I think I listen to a lot of Marvel podcasts. So they'll talk about, the movie, but they'll say, hey, we're not just going to go into the movie. We're going to talk about the canon. We're going to talk about the comics. We're going to talk about previous movies. And so I just would say that, this is I'm not going to confine myself to the book. As we talk about things, I'm going to bring in a wide range of experiences with President Obama. And I think when it talks about the vision, and I want to make sure that what I'm offering is relevant for people who are, practicing attorneys right now. I think one, we have to remember obviously that President Obama was a practicing lawyer, had legal training, was an instructor at another law school. Some may call it the University of Illinois, the South Side of Chicago, and so I think he recognized something with that is a lesson that he's passed on to me and to others, which is, I think as lawyers and often in politics, people build their argument about why someone should do something based on a sense of logic, facts, rationale, and then you get to the end. And then you say, and so you should do X. This is why, right? And I think it was Simon Sinek who wrote a really influential book that said, start with why. And I think there's a practical reason why to do that, to start by articulating a vision. I've bought a car. It's been a while, but I have a car. I just bought a new speaker from my home. I did my research, but I will tell you that after I bought the speaker, I did more research to confirm that I had made the right decision. And I think in politics and in life, and there's been research that shows this is how people make decisions. They make decisions based on emotion. They make decisions based on context. They make a decision based on belief. And then they use logic and information to buttress that decision. And so I think that's one practical reason that President Obama always wanted to start by articulating a vision. And I think the other thing I say, and this was just a leadership tool, in trying to motivate us as a staff and trying to manage this as a staff, I'll just tell you a quick story, which is during the transition, after he was elected, and he was interviewing people to be cabinet members of his cabinet, and he wanted to, we'll get into this, I'm sure, he actually had people who were not a part of his campaign, people who didn't support him in the campaign, that were cabinet members. And there was one who had experiences in other administrations, and he said, again, President Obama came out of this meeting and very thoughtful, and I was like, okay, he got some heavy information in there. And what this cabinet member told him is that as he was president, one of the things he had to understand is that there would be people in the agencies, because of good civil service reasons, that he would not be able to impact their jobs, who would actively undermine policy decisions that the president would want to make if they didn't agree with them. And so if you don't have people captured by a vision, because life is unknown and the future is unknowable, because you don't want to be in a position where you're micromanaging everyone, it's very difficult to get them to make the decisions in their own sphere of influence that move in the direction that you want them to move into, if they don't understand where you want to go and they're not bought in through a set of values that are compelling for them. And so, this was always something that was important to President Obama. Every time we had a discussion about what he wanted to do, he'd usually start kind of Abe Lincoln style, if you believe the movies and you read the books, Team of Rivals, with a story, right? A story about usually someone he had met in the campaign trail, or a story from that was real, that captured why we were doing the thing that we wanted to do. Those stories would resonate. We'd see our own stories in those stories, and he'd be able to build some common ground around the vision and what he wanted to accomplish. By the way, I've worked with him for a long time, so you can see I don't give any short answers.
Right. The book is 1,067 pages, in case I didn't know. Mike, what are any thoughts that you have? I mean, none of us are president yet. Any thoughts on what lawyers might be able to do to kind of take a page out of President Obama's book, so to speak, and follow that advice in their practice?
Yeah, I think that I think we all do this. I just don't know if we do it intentionally. And I think as leaders, it's important to be intentional about this point, which is, first of all, what's our purpose? Why are we here? Why are we in these roles? And I think many people would say, well, I'm just here to, I'm just here to get a paycheck, right? Well, I guess my answer to that would be, there are a lot of things that one could do to get a paycheck, right? All of us have ended up in a position for a reason. All of us are getting up every day for a reason. And even if that reason is, for example, to make money to be able to, take care of your family, take care of an aging parent, send your kids to college. That's a why. That's a purpose. That purpose will resonate with the people who are around you, particularly if they're a leader, particularly if you're a leader, because they're there to follow you. And they're there to believe in you. And I think giving people that insight into your purpose for being there is, just generally speaking, I think an important leadership technique that I've seen really work. But I'd say it's most important if you want to create change and innovation, because you're asking people to take a step into the unknown, right? Now, I think anybody who's been around for the last few years will know, really hard to predict the future. Pandemics, inflation, etc., right? Very difficult to predict the future. So I would say we want all of our people to be able to innovate, to be able to deal with the unknown, to be able to participate in change management. And I think the only way to, I would say, to motivate people to get uncomfortable out of a place that's known and knowable and walk with you into something that is unknown, whether it's, you know, we're going to change the way we do business here, whether it's we're going to take on a new project that that we haven't done before, whether it's we're going to move into a new area of work completely. I think you've got to be able to start with painting the picture for them as to what life is going to be like for them and with them on the other side, right? How is this going to be good for all of us on the other side of this? That's that vision. You've got to be able to paint that picture for people. And the last thing I'd say is none of President Obama's visions, whether it was Yes, We Can, remember, Yes, We Can came out of the Chicano labor movement, Si Se Puede, right? The stories that he told, if you think back to his convention speech, they were a collection of stories from people that he had met, or stories about his grandparents, or stories about his father and his mother, right? That vision should come out of a dialogue that you have with the people that you're trying to impact. And then when you articulate your vision, they'll be able to see themselves in it. And if people can see themselves in that vision, then they'll understand that this is important, not just to you as a leader, but it's important to them. They'll own it. And again, I just will repeat, unless you want to, you know, micromanage and have people just be in a compliance mode where the only thing they're going to do is check the box of all the things you told them to do. First of all, really hard to innovate and do something new if your boss, if the only thing you're doing with your boss is doing every little thing they told you to do. But also, you know, you want them to own it. And I think what I've seen and have seen, saw several times in the White House is people would bring President Obama ideas of ways to accomplish his vision that he couldn't have thought of. And I think that is a really exciting way to lead, particularly in an era of stress, anxiety, and a lot of change.
And Mike, further to your point, I think that lawyers, you know, I think if you're a lawyer, say, well, I'm working in a law firm, what can I really do? I mean, one way to do it is by introducing your teammates to your client, right? I mean, I remember when I was a junior associate in a law firm, I mean, I never met the client. I never really understood how the litigation fit into the broader picture. I think just giving more junior folks that understanding, that alone can help, help understand what the vision is.
I think that's right. And I'll just build on that by saying, you know, it was very important to President Obama that if we could, we got out of the White House, in part of my role was to bring organizations, individuals, et cetera, to the White House to have that interaction. Because, you know, if you see the life of the person you're impacting, it makes a difference in understanding why you're doing what it is that you're doing. And one substitution for that is he would, and I think people knew this, he would get a handful of letters sent to him by the correspondence team. And he would read those letters every night before he went to bed. And I will tell you that one of the more inspiring, although I think about it inspiring now, at the time it just sort of filled you with anxiety and dread, is to get a little inter-office memo. The White House was still doing inter-office memos at the time. You'd have an envelope that was obviously from the president, and in it was a letter that he had received, and he had kind of put your name on it and given it to somebody to say, basically, Strat, handle this. Which usually meant if somebody sent him a letter and it went to him, it was usually something that was impossible to solve. And then so once it got to you, it was also like doubly, because he couldn't have solved it himself. He wanted you to work on it and fix it. And so, but I will tell you, I promise you, understanding that you were doing something for, Janice Johnson and New Orleans, Louisiana, it focused the mind. And it reminded us, sort of why we were all there.
Good stuff. This sounds like a stressful job.
Just a little.
Just a little. So speaking of stress, I want to go to kind of another lesson that I had picked up in the book. That leaders need to take risks. And, President Obama took a number of risks, right? One of them is running for office. I mean, that's one obvious one. Trying to get healthcare done. He was told, right, he couldn't do it. I mean, healthcare, Clinton had tried it, it didn't work. Truman had tried it. Every Democratic president had tried it and it hadn't worked. So, I think that was another one. Going after bin Laden, an enormous risk. His own vice president was telling him not to do it, and our current president, right, telling him not to do it. What's your assessment of that? I mean, was President Obama somebody that took risks, and what can we learn from that practice in our sort of everyday lives?
Unlike the first point, which I think is very ubiquitous, I think every leader should and needs to set a vision, a compelling vision for people to follow. This sort of risk-taking perspective, in many ways, was I see President Obama as really an outlier in the people that I've met and worked with in all walks of life over my time. And obviously, I was privileged during the time of the White House. They say never meet your heroes. I had a chance to meet like most of my heroes during that time, and I would agree, don't meet your heroes. No, it was quite a great spectrum of leaders. President Obama, I think, has a unique comfort with risk, and the way he would talk about it with me was, almost as you think about somebody doing this in a gambling house in Vegas. It's sort of like, why have all these chips if you're not going to put them in the table in behalf of something meaningful? And so the story that our CEO at the Obama Foundation tells all the time is after healthcare was passed, and I think this had something to do with the fact that Mrs. Obama happened to be out of town that night. He invited a bunch of the White House team who worked on it to the residence where most of us had never been. And we were out on the Truman balcony, which you can see it faces towards the Washington Monument. And he, had a toast. And so we had champagne and everybody had a toast, and people were sort of wandering around the residence. Again, I feel like there was a little bit of, I'm here by myself, like it's a big night, let me have some people over to celebrate. And like, no one's here to say, I can't do this, what are you doing? And as we were up there, Valerie looked at him and said, what's a more meaningful moment for you, President Obama? Is it, and we all, by the way, would call him President Obama, and we all still reflectively, instinctively call him President Obama, even those of us who knew him back in the day as Barack. I almost literally can't say that word and say that name anymore. What was more meaningful for you, election night or tonight? And President Obama said, it's not even close. Election night, the purpose of election night was to get to tonight, right? And I think that was always his mindset. If I have a great approval rating, if I have people who are looking up to me, if I have the resources and the opportunity. And I think the other thing that's a part of this is the sense that all this is temporary and all this is fleeting. And so, if you're not going to be president forever, and if this moment that you have is not going to be here forever, where you have this opportunity with this Congress, with this approval rating, with this perspective from the American people, with this mandate, what are you waiting for? Let's risk it. And then I think the other thing that's a part of taking that risk calculation is the acceptance of you may not get to the goal, right? But in moving in that direction, you're going to move things further towards the goal. And so the other statement that he had that came along with taking that risk that he always used to say is better is good. We would try to do things and we'd have all these designed for the perfect outcome in our minds, or at least the best outcome that we could get considering all the factors that were in play. But then at a certain point, you couldn't get there, or you had to figure out what you wanted to get. And President Obama's idea was better is good, because he looked at it as a relay race, right? It wasn't his job to take us to solve all the problems in the world and perfect our union, right? His job was to make our union more perfect. And then after 8 years, hopefully, hand the baton off to someone else. And frankly, as a generation, for us to do the best we can in this moment. But part of our job is to hand things off to another generation that's coming behind us, which is the work of the Obama Foundation. Today, it's the very purpose that the Obama Foundation was created to achieve.
Outstanding. I mean, one of the other things I would observe about President Obama is, I think he sort of checked his law school self at the door, right? I mean, in law school, we teach students all the time, right, to avoid risk. And many lawyers, you ask, lawyers all the time, their job is to say no, and that frustrates clients, right? So my only addition to what you mentioned is, understand that as a leader, you have to take your lawyer hat off to some degree and understand that as a leader, it's your job to assess risk, but take the ones that make sense. And that's something I think a lot of politicians are afraid to do, and a lot of lawyers are afraid to do. And certainly, I think you're right. President Obama had no problem taking risks, and he took it on the chin, a number of times when the risk didn't pan out. But that's the nature of leadership.
I think so. The only thing I'd say about him, and he has conversations a lot with young people, and particularly through the My Brother's Keeper work with boys and young men of color. And I think one of the things that he tells people, and I've been with him in the middle of Chicago in the toughest neighborhoods in the city. He's talked to young people. I think he has a sense that one, life isn't fair, right? It should be more fair, but it isn't. And so part of what he did, and you can maybe go to earlier books to read about this, is he started to kind of get a good sense of himself, what his strengths were and what his weaknesses are. And I think when you do that, it gives you the ability to take more risks, because you're not going to rise and fall by the result as a person. You know who you are, right? And if you know who you are, and you know whose you are, and you buttress yourself around that, family, friends, etc., then, if you lose an election, if an attempt that you make fails, well, actually, I won't say if, we can get into this, when you get criticized, it's only gonna hurt so much, right? It's only gonna penetrate so far, because you know who you are beyond what you do and what you're presenting out into the world.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Let's go to a sort of another point that I had picked up from the book, which is the fact that President Obama was a pretty good listener. He listened very carefully. And you see it early in the book. I mean, he talks about how, as a community organizer, how being in Chicago changed the arc of his life, talking about how he had to listen to the people around him as a community organizer and able to get anything done. And when he started running for the Senate, it sounded like he was talking a lot, and then he wasn't really getting any traction, and he started listening more. And he said, the more I listened, the more people opened up. So he always struck me, even before reading the book, as being a pretty good listener. What's your evaluation of that as an ingredient in his leadership style?
Fundamental. I think, one of the, and this really has to do with my working relationship with him, and it is probably the thing that we have connected on the most. He asked me to come to Chicago at this point almost 8 years ago to begin a dialogue with the city about, the Obama Foundation and the Obama Presidential Center while he was still in the second term. We were very far away from where we are today, a couple of years from opening the Presidential Center doors. And it was because he wanted to have someone that he trusted do the listening that he knew would be critical for him to design the right approach and the strategy. And I think the thing that I think is really important for lawyers, and I think has really been important for me, is to be able to understand the art and the science of having your own vision, having your own view, having your own idea and agenda of what you want to accomplish, you've done the analysis, you've done the strategy, and yet leave room in that process as you're designing it and as you're executing it to get people who are being impacted by this or who have different perspectives than you do, to allow their views to penetrate at least the idea of the leader. They don't have to always show up, right? You don't need to. I remember having this question asked for President Obama when he asked me to do this job at the foundation. I was like, is this going to be Apple or is this Android, right? Is this something that and by Apple I sort of meant what I usually expected him to do, which is he has a design perspective around what he wants to accomplish. He owns that, and I think a leader should own that, right? And then we also want to find ways for people to engage with it and give us feedback on it along the design process, as opposed to by the Android comment I meant, is this going to be crowdsourced, right? Are we going to do something that is going to be, and I knew what the answer was going to be. I just was, this is just me and you talking, right? I was just trying to show him that I was going to do a good job because I was really excited about the opportunity. I think the other thing I've seen, and I've seen this when I was at the law firm practicing myself, and I've seen it again in life, is this anxiety around, well, if I ask people their opinion and I don't do what they say, they're going to be upset. And I would just say I have found that generally not to be true along with the following circumstances and caveats. The first is that, if you are authentically listening to them, I think people know when you're checking the box. I think people, I'm working from home here, so I would assume people know in your marriage, people know in your personal relationships, and people know in your professional relationships where you're really not asking because you're not listening because you don't really want to know. You're just asking in order to say that you've asked. I think people, when they see that, they realize they're in a transactional relationship with you, and they decide how to figure out how to drive their agenda against yours. I think when you're authentically listening to people, then if they don't see, I've found that people always want to take credit for good work. And so they'll come by and say, oh, I told them that. That's when you've been successful in life, is when someone says, yeah, that was my idea. I told them to do that. That's actually one of my signs that we've been successful. The last thing I said, and this goes back to the first point I made, which is vision, which is if you bring those stories and you bring them to life in your work, and this can just be truly in a small law firm, right? If at the end of the year, when you're talking about all the work that you're doing, and you say in that, I just want to celebrate everybody's amazing work. Employee X, I remember when you told me why that X, Y, and Z, and you talk about that as a part of who you are as an organization. I promise you, Employee X will be on cloud nine during that moment. They will know that you've seen them and that they truly are a part of the vision of what you're trying to create. The last thing is that, law firms like the White House can be very hierarchical organizations. I think this is in part the White House because so much of the White House tradition was created under people who had served in the military. And so just for example, people in our White House like Valerie Jarrett, Rahm Emanuel, the chief of staff, David Axelrod, political advisor, General Jones, national security advisor, their titles were assistant to the president. The people who worked under them were deputy assistants to the president, and the people who worked under them were special assistants to the president. And that designation would decide where your office was, what meetings you would attend, where you would sit in those meetings, whether you would sit at the table or kind of on the outside. You see those tables on those chairs on the side. It's a very hierarchical environment. President Obama would always, and I knew this was happening, and so I started to warn staff people about it. He would always call on people who did not, like the person in the corner with the notepad who was scribbling notes, and ask them their opinion on something. And he would say he did that for a couple of reasons. One, that person actually usually knew a lot more than had been filtered through the process of the specials to the deputy to the assistant to the president, right? Sometimes opinions get filtered through and you don't always get all the information. Two, he was sending a signal to everybody else that they should be listening to those people. And three, he was sending a signal to that person that they better be ready and paying and all the discussion, because he might call on them and would want their opinion. And so that kind of not only active listening, but creating an environment that is designed to effectuate that listening, I think is a leadership skill that was at least a really relevant part of his White House.
And I think that lawyers are particularly bad at this. As you say, law firms are hierarchical. And so it wouldn't occur to most senior lawyers to ask the most junior person what they think. But I do remember when I was a junior associate, the chairman of my firm, actually, we were on a trial, a huge trial, and the chairman of the firm asked me how I would cross-examine a witness, and I was blown away. And when I gave him the idea and he used it in the courtroom, he had me sold for a long time.
Exactly.
So it didn't matter that I was there at 2 a.m, right? I felt like I was part of the team. So those are things that I think we can all do in our everyday lives. You don't have to be president to do that. Let's go to a point that I think President Obama really did well. And this is the idea of leaders benefiting by bringing together a diverse and inclusive group to work with them. And there's lots of evidence in the book on this. He picked Hillary Clinton, his political enemy, to be Secretary of State. He picked Bob Gates, a Republican, to be Secretary of Defense. He reached out when he was trying to get the stimulus bill passed in 2009. He reached out to the Republicans and worked his butt off to try to get the Republicans on board. It wasn't super successful. But that seems something that President Obama was really good at. Can you comment on his value?
Yeah. Well, I'll start by just addressing a kind of a common critique and offering my perspective on it. And it was this idea that if he would, just like have the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, or Mitch McConnell over for a beer and hung out with them more, that they would sort of be more cooperative. And I think that if the 4 years following his administration didn't convince people that there was a structural issue, and it wasn't like a feature of President Obama's personality that was stopping that from happening, I don't know what else would. Now, you can place your blame on him or responsibility on him to be able to do that, but I think he ended up being a 2-term president. He spent an enormous amount of time with the Republicans. And I think what he found, and I think this is still a factor, frankly, that, but it was very relevant during that time, that often if he publicly took credit for something, that he would eliminate the ability for one of the members of the other side to take credit for it and to participate in it. And so, and I think this was, another way he was willing to lead, which was he was willing to basically look like he wasn't getting anything done in order to get things done, right? And this phrase we used to use often is that part of leadership is absorbing pain, right? That's part of the job. And if people are angry about something, particularly if they're angry about something that's going on in the country, the president is the recipient of that anger. That's actually part of the job. You are not just, it is right. We aren't in a parliamentary system. The president of the United States is both the head of government and the representative head of government, right? And so as that representative head of government, they need to be there to, they get like quarterback of, it's like the quarterback of our beloved Chicago Bears, probably gets more praise than they deserve, probably gets more criticism than they deserve. So I would just say that comes to mind for me when I think about this. I think the other thing I'd say when it comes to diversity is kind of diversity of thought, which is I think what we were really looking for. President Obama was looking for early on, considering the crisis that the country was in at the time. Right, the economy was falling apart. We were on our way to another Great Depression. We were in the middle of 2 wars and had other things cascading around the world. Never mind, the implications of climate change were, quite obvious to everyone, and the clock was ticking on our time to reverse it. Our economy had, fundamentally changed through technology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so part of what we needed was a diverse group of thinking. I won't call them out, but, I have several them out, but I think I saw several of my dear friends who went to law school with me on this. I would say at least one of them is another, 55-year-old Black guy from Chicago. One of the reasons why we're really good friends is we know the same movies, we know the same songs, we hung out in the same places, we all participate in the same thing. There he is. If you put him and I together, you're not going to get a lot of diverse thinking, even though we're 2 Black guys, right? If we're just the only people making a decision, our decision making is going to be limited by our experience and our perspective. And so I think part of what we want and what we wanted at the time was a diversity of thought and perspectives. Now, what that creates is a tremendous amount of tension and a tremendous amount of like arguments, right? Because you have people who see things completely differently. And I think part of what you have to do is set up an arena where people can argue fiercely internally and then hold hands and jump together, right? Once a decision is made, then that decision is made, you move forward with a united front. And I think you can only do that if people really feel like, one, that they were heard, and 2, whoever is making that decision is going to own the consequences of it, right? If you're going to end up owning the consequences of a decision, this happens a lot in organizations where people argue about things and the leader makes it pretty clear that if something goes wrong, they're going to blame one of the people inside, then you're not going to get the kind of united front moving forward with a decision, which you really need if you're doing something that hasn't been done before. And all the risk is going to be around the execution. I'll bring up something, it's probably still too soon for me to bring it up because of how challenging it was, but I'll bring up the debacle around the healthcare website, healthcare.gov, right? We talked about that signature moment when it became to be implemented, the website crashed. Now, in that moment, if we had an environment in the White House, which was one in which everyone knew that the person who delivered the website was going to get blamed for this, we would not have been able to rally in the way we did, completely change many things about how the government did business through technology, and shifted quickly to create a website. Everybody would have been figuring out how to cover their own butt. But they all knew at that point that President Obama was going to be the one that was going to assume all the responsibility and the blame for it. He wasn't going to leak to the press, well, it was really this person's fault that they were the ones who did the wrong thing. And we were able, I think, to innovate pretty quickly to create a solution to a pretty huge mistake and a disastrous situation. So I think that's an example of where that diversity of thought and creating that sort of environment that created safety for disagreement among people with diverse backgrounds came into play.
By the way, you brought up another, I think, hallmark aspect of President Obama's leadership, which is this concept of integrity, right? So one of the things I observed in the book was if you can't trust the leader, right, the leader is absolutely ineffective. And one of the things that everyone around President Obama knew is that if they screwed something up, that he would take the blame for it, right? That he would not basically blame them. And, not every president does that. Are there other instances where you saw President Obama's integrity lead to some good results?
Yeah, I'll give you an example of one that I'm not really that proud of, which is the only time I ever, literally the only time I ever stormed into the Oval Office. So if you can think back, this was about healthcare. Ted Kennedy tragically died. And there was a special election in Massachusetts, and all of our it was really important to us because it was a seat that would retain a majority that would be able to pass legislation at the level that we wanted passed. The Democrats lost that election, and I was furious. It was, I thought, a self-inflicted wound, and I I ended up blaming some of my colleagues for that in my mind. And I thought that he was being, um, I wasn't happy about how that happened. And I went to go talk to him about it. I'd seen some commentary and I got pretty worked up. And, as I said, I only stormed into the Oval Office once. So this is not like people are used to. My kids will tell you that I get angry like once a year. They usually end up apologizing to me for it and asking me if I'm okay. So I go in and I rant about this. He's staring at me, he's looking at me. And he's, like I said, I don't get that angry that often. His eyes are getting bigger and bigger as I'm like ranting. And the first thing he said when I'm done, which really, really pissed me off more, was he said, "Calm down." And he reminded me that if there was anybody in that office between the two of us that had the right to be angry, it was him and not me. And he, didn't spend much more time on it at all. Didn't have much, he had enough patience to hear me out. But, he was just he reminded me that he had more of a right to be angry than I did, that he was focused on what we were going to do next, and that he expected me to do the same thing. And so I kind of, made some lame comment, I think probably about college basketball, to try to preserve some sense of like coolness, because I lost all my chill at that point, and just kind of meekly wandered out of his office and let him go back to like this incredibly hard job that I interrupted him from. And I think that the lesson that I learned there, as I saw it play out, was one that I learned all the time, which is he's never going to throw anybody under the bus. He just wasn't. If a person ended up not belonging there for whatever reason, they'd find their way to the door. He'd make sure they found their way to the door, but he wasn't going to do it in a way that would undermine his own integrity. And I think that, at the end of the day, there are people who I talk to all the time, polling shows this, all kinds of things show this, where there are people who disagree with him vehemently. They're based on the things that he's done. There are people who disagree with him vehemently based upon the things that they've told that he didn't do. And I think there was a sense continually that underneath all of that, he was a man that operated with integrity. And I'll just say that, that has ended up for me being, and I share this all the time, that ends up being the thing that lasts. I know it's corny to say that. But, there are people that remember how you made decisions and acted when you've made mistakes, when there have been crises, when circumstances have gone completely against you. And if you're still going to be in the legal profession, you're still going to be in the city of Chicago, you're still going to have the same LinkedIn contact, people will come around and find opportunities to work for you, because I think we live in a very difficult, volatile, unknown, and unknowable world. And folk who can operate in that world with integrity end up being very valuable. And I just would, kind of see that over and over again. And I'd also see, people who would spend all their time looking out for themselves, feathering their own nest, making sure that they looked good in the press. And I would just promise you, we all saw that too at the time, and took a lesson from that, that those were people that we couldn't trust. I know this would be a much more a sexier CLE if I name names and told those stories, but you'll have to wait for my book. It will not be 1,000 pages, I promise you, before I get into all that.
And Mike, this all sounds kind of, as you say, pretty basic and not very sexy. But the fact of the matter is that these things happen all the time, right? I mean, lawyers, it's very common to sell, more junior people down the river, as it were, right? And I remember when I was an associate in a firm, a couple things I tried to do, right, is one, I tried not to sell anyone out that was junior to me. And two, when somebody did something wrong, I always sat them down and I said, look, I could put this in an evaluation that will show up a year from now, and it'll be anonymized and you probably won't know who it is. Or I can be honest with you and tell you what it is. And let me tell you what I would do differently. And I found that all of those people wanted to work with me, more often, right? Because they had the faith that I wouldn't, try to torch them, that I was trying to help them. And so that's something I think that we as lawyers can learn a lot from President Obama on and do in our everyday lives. If we just follow those two, kind of basic things as examples, I think integrity is something that, we can all always work on together.
I recall, I haven't practiced in a while, but as I think back to my litigation days, I would also say, because I did a lot of employment law, most of my cases came from people who didn't do this. Most of the lawsuits came. So maybe, as lawyers, I think, we'll accept the human condition and understand that, but we all need to add to it.
Right.
We all need to add to it ourselves.
So another topic where I think President Obama really made some good, brought some good examples, is the concept of resilience, right? And a lot of people think, oh well, President Obama, he was one of the youngest presidents in history, and everything was going right. But a lot of people forget that he got blown out by Bobby Rush by 30, 35 points.
I couldn't get I knew we were going to lose that race when my grandmother told me she wasn't going to vote for him. This is not an exaggeration. I was like, they were on the cover of the Sun-Times, and I was visiting my grandmother over the weekend, and I was like, Grandma, this is a friend of mine. And she looked at me and she said, why does he want to take Bobby Rush's job? And I was like, A, power of incumbency.
Yeah.
B, if I can't get my grandmother to vote for Barack Obama, we might be in trouble.
Right. So resilience is something that I thought, and of course he dealt with the healthcare issue, and he dealt with the stimulus package. A lot of dealing with losing the House. There was certainly a lot of adversity throughout the two terms, but it seems like he did everything he could to handle it. What can we learn as lawyers from that trait?
Well, I think what I'd say is that, sometimes there is something to be said for just plain old stubbornness. Most of the lawyers that I know have that trait and are pretty good at just sort of sticking to your guns. And I think if you think about President Obama, one of the things that happens when you're in public life in that way is your commitments are out there, right? Your commitments are out there, your values are out there, you've articulated this. And so I think part of, what we used to have this phrase we called a member of our team, his name is Phil Shalero. We called him Third Way. Because he was, we'd do this analysis and he'd say, all right, well, we can't do it this way. That's not going to work. We can't do it that way. That's not going to work. And then we'd pause, and then, we'd wait, and we started to anticipate this, and we would ask, all right, well, what's the third way? And I think that, there is this sense of iterative progress is good, right? That creates a perspective of resilience. We're gonna kind of lose some, we're gonna win some, but we're gonna make things better along the way. That's our job as public servants. And I think that's always important as you're trying to, achieve a path, and particularly on behalf of somebody else, which is how we thought about our work at the time. I also think there is an opportunity for all of us, lawyers included, to again not identify ourselves fully with our work and our role, such that a loss isn't a loss for us as human beings, but a loss along another another journey that we're participating in. One of the beautiful things about democracy and about American democracy is you understand real quick as you're involved in the White House that you're not actually in charge. That there is, if you want to get something done, there is a role for others. There has to be a role for others to do it. And so again, a win is not your win, and a loss is not your loss. We're in a collective moment and a collective action if we're going to achieve something. And I think that, sort of creates a level of resilience. And then, the last thing is that, to remember, as our board chair, Marty Nesbitt, one of President Obama's best friends, often says to us, which is, it's not about you. And we'll have conversations sometimes, personnel conversations. And Marty will basically say, well, the problem with that person is they think this is about them. And it's not about them. And I think, having a sense that we're engaged in something that's bigger than ourselves, one, I think it creates a sense of, for me at least, it creates a sense of that we're, of momentum, of motivation, a sense of being a part of a movement. I know I'm doing all the M things here. I think this is another thing. I've been in politics for too long, a lot of alliteration. But I also think it's this idea that we're here on behalf of others. Last thing I'll this is a personal story. But in the early days of the administration, I was pretty intimidated. I was kid from uptown, and I found myself working in the White House. And I knew I belonged there partially because I had a JD from the University of Illinois. But I also was thank you. But I was also surrounded by a lot of people because of who he brought in, who had been in the White House before. And names that I knew, and I was pretty intimidated by the environment, and wasn't always able to speak. One of the things that President Obama said early on in a meeting with me, it's like day 2 of our time in there. He's like, "Man, you gotta spend more time in the Oval Office because you're freaking me out right now. You're so intimidated." And my eyes were rolling in the back of my head. I just could not believe I was there. I couldn't believe he was there. I couldn't believe where we were. I'm looking around. I'm like, that's not like the bust of King. Isn't that like, the Roosevelt desk? I was just like, I couldn't handle it. And what I started to do, and this came from an advisor who's an executive coach. I just thought of a mantra around why I was there. And I just got connected back to my purpose, which was I was there to speak for those who couldn't speak for themselves. That was literally my job. I was running outreach. And just understanding that, it quieted my unconscious, my sort of imposter syndrome brain that was in my head all the time, and helped me focus and be successful. And so I think those things are really important and critical in those environments, and a lesson maybe that others could take something from.
It's funny you had the reaction of the White House. I remember my first week at a law firm. I mean, walking around, with all the artwork and the chairs, and I'm like, wow, I don't have furniture like this. So we probably can all relate to that. Let's go to another point that President Obama talks about in his book, and that's the concept of humility. And one of the things that he talks about in the book is his trip around the world, which some people would call the apology tour, right? But his view in the book is, look, I want to make it clear that America is not perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. People are right and wrong at different times. And he wanted to be accessible to a lot of different parts of the world that heretofore hadn't really seen American presence. Can you comment on President Obama's kind of use of humility as a leadership tool?
Well, I think I just, and there are a lot of different leadership styles. So I'll just articulate his as I saw it. If you are the strongest person in the room, if you're the most powerful person in the room, his thought was that the best way to, and you can't dictate the outcome, right? There are sometimes, I don't know, I have 3 kids. There was a time when I wanted them to get dressed and I wanted them to get into the car seat where I could dictate the outcome as best I could. Sorry, I just had a bad memory of trying to get a screaming kid into a car seat. So maybe that's not the best example. Then, maybe it might be a good thing to lead with humility. It might be, but it may not be necessary to effectuate your outcome. But I think that, there is a approach to life, to history, to decision making that says might makes right. And there are people who believe that. I think in a functioning
I didn't think,
democracy.
I didn't think about them.
Kathleen, how you doing? All right, Kathleen's back on mute. I think that in our system, which I think comes out of a history and a belief that I think our political system and our legal system comes out of, which is that things should be open to dispute, that there are different competing views and that they both could be right in the way that someone thinks about them, or in a way a neutral party might think about them. And we need to bring these views and perspectives into a polity, into a system, our legal system, our political system, in which those things can be judged, disputed, decided upon in a way that gives everybody voice and the opportunity and the right to participate in the system, right? So if you believe that, and you don't believe then that might makes right, then one of the more powerful leadership things that one can do, if you're the person in the room that has the most power, is step into a space of humility, to be the second person that talks, not the first, to learn that person's language and address them in their language, to learn that person's beliefs and perspectives, and accommodate those in the way you approach the dialogue. And I think, I just have to remind people that we were just coming out of an era in which we needed, I don't know if people remember a pandemic that came, from overseas to our shores and devastated our economy and killed millions of people. Global pandemics, economy, climate, etc., war and peace. We needed to be in a situation where we had to get the rest of the world in a place where they were willing to work with us aggressively to solve those problems. And the best way to begin that effort was to show up with a sense of, and I don't know if humility is even the right word, I would say with a sense of common ground and common understanding, to try to create that space. If the powerful person moves first into that space, it gives room for the less powerful person to move into that space. Because if you force the person with the less power to move first, you're kind of reinforcing the power position and not necessarily creating a place for common ground. I don't know if, none of the people that he dealt with were dumb. So I think they knew, no matter what he did at the beginning, that he was still the representative of the most powerful nation in the history of the world, with the most powerful military and the largest economy in the history of the world. So I don't really pay a lot of attention to anyone that says that, in doing so, he diminished America. Everybody knows what America is. Everybody knows what America does, and everybody knows what America stands for, as long as our leaders articulate that. I don't know how relevant we've gotten here to lawyers, this point is would turn out to be much more a point about our national, what we believe in, and the democratic values that we believe in. But I guess what I'd say is those values, in my view, underpin our legal system, and our legal system is one of the things that has made us the country that we are, and it's one of the values that I think we project powerfully around the world. And so lawyers standing up for those values, and not actively and calling out those within our profession that undermine those values is just critically important right now, because those values are in contest. There are some who believe, and this is a view that is ascendant, or at least articulated right now, might makes right, positions of our legal system, our system of government, our system of making decisions is wrongheaded and shouldn't be moved. That is something that is being moved forward. And there are things that President Obama and I think other values that have made us the country that we are today, that buttress our legal system, our democracy, and the like. And I think standing on one side of that clearly is an important thing for everybody to be a part of today, in big and small ways.
Well, I love all that. And let me bring it right to lawyers. I mean, the truth is law school doesn't really reward humility in many ways, right? I mean, law school teaches everyone to have the right answer. In a courtroom, right? You're expected to have the right answer. When a client asks for your help, you're expected to have the right answer, right? So being a lawyer doesn't necessarily lend itself to humility in many ways. As a leader, I think, you have to be more willing to utter the words, "I need your help," right? And if you can go to other, maybe the people that you work with, that work for you, or that are, sort of below you on the organizational structure, and say, "Look, I need your help. I need to figure this out." And it's very empowering for people that do not have the same amount of power or authority as you. And I think they're going to work every bit as hard. And, when I was a partner in my law firm, I went to my second and third year associates and say, "Look, I need your help. I need to figure this out." It was one of the reasons that folks were willing to work with me in many respects, because they felt like they were adding value. So I think that just practicing that kind of strategy and effort with people that you work with, I think can have a strong impact. Just saying, "I need your help" might be a very powerful leadership tool.
I agree. Life is a team sport, Greg.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about a related issue, which is this idea of taking care of your team. So one of the things, and this I think is related to humility, one of the things that you see in the book, President Obama will chat with the gardeners, right? He'll stop and talk about the plants and what the storm did to them. And he really went out of his way to take care of folks. When he talks about when he went into a meeting, everybody was nervous and he tried to lighten the mood. And what he apparently did is he would walk into offices, maybe he did this to you, walk into your office and say, "Hey, how's it going?" And these are not things a typical leader does. What is that an accurate perception? And
yeah,
and how it affected everybody around him?
I mean, other things that he would do is he would, and Mrs. Obama played a big role in this. When they did events, they would make them family events. And so we would have Halloween, and there was we were invited, but our families were invited as well. We'd have holiday parties, and these holiday parties would be, generally speaking, these things where we'd have to work, right? It would be these kind of, you've seen these pictures of the president, the first lady with someone at a holiday party, right? You can imagine there are like thousands of people who come through, and the staff has to be the ones that were there. And they would always do a special holiday party for us. And, we'd have our spouses there, and he would go out of his way to use his network to make calls for, having these special experiences. So, I remember I'm getting a little choked up as I think about it, because I remember just how meaningful it was for my wife to be able to participate in these things, because, as you can imagine, she didn't see me that much. And she understood that That was part of the decision that we made. But, President Obama would recognize, and he'd say that all the time. He'd say this primarily with the military because the military had way more, obviously, amount of sacrifice than anyone that I did or anyone who worked with me. But he'd say, when someone serves, the family serves. And so, we'd have Harry Connick Jr. come and perform, if he's playing at the Kennedy Center for a holiday set, he'd come to the White House and do something for and with our spouses. So those little gestures made a difference. At those events, he would always go out of their way to talk to them. He'd, find out everybody's kids' names. He'd ask about them, just to create this sense that, first of all, that helps me out a lot. I'm driving home and, what I get is, God, that was great. He's so nice. He's so kind. I'm really glad you're there. I know this is hard, but it's a big deal. Your mother-in-law here's the same thing. It makes life a little easier as far as taking care of your staff. I think the other thing that it did is it created an environment in which he saw how hard we were working. So he literally would see it. Your office wasn't always in the best shape. He lived above the store, so he was there all night anyway. When he wandered around and saw that you were there, he understood that you were there all night as well. He just saw that, so you didn't feel like you were kind of in it by yourself, and he didn't understand the sacrifices people make. And then the last thing I'd say, which I always noticed and has started to be something that I'd incorporate, is the only time I would see him angry is if someone mistreated a member of his team. So if we had like a celebrity or somebody who didn't really understand how to treat people who didn't have the same status as they are with respect, and he heard that they mistreated someone, talked down to somebody, yell at somebody, he'd get pretty angry pretty quickly, deal with it immediately, and then come around and ask us what happened. And if it ended up being something that we had done, he'd admonish us, he'd deal with it. But his first reaction was to protect his team. And I think that, that sort of instinct, it created, and I just would say this, a profound amount of loyalty, such that, and this is something that he talked about, he's very proud of the fact that, there wasn't a, ethics scandal during his tenure. We didn't have a independent counsel appointed and any of that stuff. And I think that, it did not come from having, President Obama or anybody associated with him as a watchdog, right? There wasn't anybody going around checking everybody's stuff. It came from a level of loyalty that we had for him, such that someone asked me how I felt after he got reelected. And I said, it's such a relief. And they were like, why? I said, because for the first time, I could go to work without worrying about making a mistake that would keep him from being reelected, which was it was the thing I was most afraid of. I'm sure I made plenty of mistakes. In fact, I'll repeat that. I am sure I made plenty of mistakes. But I was always anxiety ridden about doing something that would hurt him. And I wasn't the only person who felt that way. He just engendered fierce loyalty because he would protect and look out for his team.
Well, and he talks in the book about one of the reasons he did that somewhat intentionally is he knew that the hours were long and he knew everyone was under a lot of pressure, right? And so he was doing what he could to, try to, make people feel as good as possible about it.
Yeah. So, yeah. And there would be, if he'd understand, for example, I had the opportunity, because it was something that it was really important to me, to make sure that the 1985 Chicago Bears got a chance to come to the White House. There was the Challenger tragedy after the Super Bowl, And I was just like, hey, I'm here. I'm a Chicago guy. He's a Chicago guy. Let me see if I can pull this off. And he was just like, yeah, that'd be fun. Let's do it. Let's get it done. And it was just, and I think part of that was, yeah, that'd be great. But part of that was he knew it was important to me. And it was this sort of, small thing that was obviously huge for the team, a cool thing for the city. But I think he knew that for those of us from Chicago, it would be like one of the great days that we wouldn't forget.
For
If we were in
sure.
my office right now, I'd show you the signed football.
Yeah, I wish I had known you then, so you could have invited me. That would have been awesome.
Yeah, well,
The Super Bowl shuffle there, right? Let's cover one more topic, and then we'll open it up for questions and things that we might have missed. And that's the concept of optimism. President Obama is generally a pretty optimistic guy, at least from the book, and what we see, publicly. But there's a lot of instances where there were tough things happening, and his optimism seemed to push the team through. And one of the best examples is when Hillary Clinton pounded him in New Hampshire, right? He won the Iowa caucuses and everybody was good. And then all of a sudden she came back and drubbed him, right? I mean, and he talks about how bummed his staff was and how it was his character and his sort of optimism that pulled them through. So can you comment on that briefly?
Yeah, that
some questions.
That was the second time I was like super pissed. I'm sure there was more, but when we lost that race, I was livid. I was sitting. I had already moved to South Carolina, and I didn't go to New Hampshire.
Well, you lost,
which is not a comment. We would have definitely lost if I was in New Hampshire. Not maybe. I would have guaranteed it. But I think that it was an idea. I think I would call him a cautious optimist, if I could say that. I think he always wanted to know. He wanted to know the risks. Unlike Han Solo, he wanted to know the odds. He wanted to know the downsides. And I think this came from his legal training. He wanted to know each side of the argument and what the sharpest case against him was, so that he could buttress against and navigate against that. We would be in these discussions inside the Oval Office, and he would be very skeptical if we brought him a consensus view. And he would probe and probe and probe and push until this was earlier. After a while, we started bringing the full view into the Oval Office, but for a while we started bringing consensus view, and he would just not let it go until he found out who disagreed with the decision even slightly and why. He just was very skeptical of because if there was an easy decision, it wasn't made by him. It didn't come to us. And so that was really important. And then after understanding all of that, having put a plan together to manage the downside risk and deal with the really solid arguments of the opponents, and change the strategy in order to accommodate the really solid arguments of the opponents, he was willing to move forward. And I think that the sense of if we could possibly do it, we should try. I think is an optimistic way of thinking, but I also think that it's also a sense of history, and he would bring this up a lot because there were always fears, there were always downsides, there were always political risks to be taken. But I think he would often remind us of just historically where we were and how far we've come. So, another story that comes from Third Way Shalero that I remember is he once asked President Obama, as well, the only way we could do that is, he was about to offer a strategy, and he said, well, I gotta ask you, you feel lucky? And President Obama said, "My name is Barack Obama, and we're talking in the Oval Office right now, and I'm president of the United States." Of course, I feel lucky. What's the plan? And I just think that optimism is tinged with that knowledge of how unlikely his journey was, and how unlikely all of our journeys, all of our journeys ending up in this place, were alongside of his.
Cool. Well, fantastic points, Mike. We got some questions. So Steve Ross has a question. I will just go in the queue here.
This is my Steve Ross, who was one of the people who encouraged me to pursue many of the paths that I pursued when I was in law school. He was one of the law school professors that I felt like really saw me. So it's very sweet that he's here. It's good to see you, Steve.
Great. Thank you so much for doing this. Look forward to catching up privately. I want to talk to you a bit about your story about the Health and Human Services website and President Obama's taking responsibility. And how do you balance that with accountability? I'm reminded that President Reagan took responsibility for the death of the Marines in Beirut. And I understand that there was really never a careful follow-up of the things that went wrong. And so in general, and thinking about law practice, because those comments really were directed to so many of the people listening in, if you know that President Obama is always going to take the responsibility, he's very popular, what does that say about internal accountability from this? And then my one other example where I thought accountability culture went awry was after the DNC was clearly shown to have been improperly favoring Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders, and everybody was calling for Debbie Wasserman Schultz to resign because it was her responsibility. She absolutely would not do so until President Obama called her and basically fired her. And so I wonder if you could just comment on how you pair the stories you shared with us today with personal accountability for people other than President Obama for making important decisions.
Yeah, thank you for that question, because I'm reminded of an experience that we would often have when, we would make mistakes, when we would get it wrong. And he would, and I think I alluded to this a bit as far as, people would find their way out. But, his, one of the reasons why you wouldn't want to disappoint him, it wasn't just because you didn't want to let him down, but because you knew you were going to have a conversation with him and explain what happened. And if you didn't have an answer that showed integrity, judgment, and that you were there for the right reasons, that would be exposed. And it wasn't going to be a private conversation, right? It was going to be an after action is what we would call it. And we'd have an after action meeting, and we would talk about what went wrong, because he would want to make sure it didn't happen again. And part of what he would say publicly as he took responsibility or accountability for it himself, is he would make a commitment usually that he was going to look into this and that it wouldn't happen again and that he would fix it. One of the things that if you look at, there is something that's called the U.S. Digital Service, which was created in order to recruit technologists to work in the White House. Just to be, someone actually put a book out recently about this, but just to be brief, what we found before the healthcare.gov debacle was that there were not internet product managers inside the White House who were engineers who were looking at the product. Instead, there were project managers who were managing external consultants. And so, we very much changed the way we did business. But there were people who were responsible for that who had to either shift how they did business or not work there any longer. And I think that, that level of accountability comes from his, I think one, he has a sense that he's a very patient boss. And so once he's given you, all that he's, had you have a sense of comfort, backed you up, invited your team, yelled at somebody who might have yelled at you, all that, if you still can't perform, then you just don't belong there anymore. And then the last thing is that it also is not about, it's not about you. It's not about him. It's about public service and what he's there to do for others. And so he's not going to sacrifice results for you. And I literally, the phrase I use is kind of comes out of that mindset, which is, you don't belong here anymore, right? There are other places for you to do what it is that you do, but you have shown that you shouldn't be here. Why don't we, and this is a kind way to put it, but I remember saying this, let's find someplace else for you to be where you can succeed.
Yeah, well put. We got another question here from Michelle Rogers. What skills did President Obama use to repair his relationship with Hillary Clinton?
A couple things I'd say. The first is that primaries are like family fights. And so, and sometimes family fights can be fierce. But, if you choose to, there always is some common ground to fall back on. I think that, one that primary got personal, but I don't think any of them did anything that they, sort of felt like they had to really walk back from, well, the supporters did. I think that's number one. I think number two, what was really interesting about that time is we were in such a crisis that a lot of those differences and challenges really started to become, started to feel small in relation to the challenges that were in front of us. And three, and I think President Obama knew this, he had a position to deliver upon something. Hillary Clinton is one of the more accomplished people in public life. And part of the reason is that she's ambitious and she wants to be involved in big things. She wants to lead in a big way. She wants to be on a big stage and she wants to get big things done. I think President Obama knew he had a role for her that would allow her to accomplish that if he was able to show her that, she would be able to, like a better word, do her thing, right? Be the leader that, she was, not have him, kind of minimizing her. But it was also important for him to hear that she understood that he was president of the United States. And they, I wasn't a part of that dialogue. They had that dialogue. They got there. And I think the skills that are involved in that, to specifically answer your question, I'd say one is knowing what the goal is, and being really clear about that. I think one of the things that happens often in intense, stressful situations, and I've seen it happen, I remember this often when I was a lawyer, I would sometimes want to beat the lawyer who I was on the other side of, more than I wanted to achieve. I would kind of like lose track of what the goal was for the client, right? At a certain point, I just wanted to beat you, because we were in such a combative environment. And in some respects, that instinct is valuable, but I think having a way to always remember what the North Star is, and what success is, and then being clear about what the steps are to success in case you need to, take half a loaf along the way is really an important skill. Again, remembering that it's sort of not about you, that we're here for a larger purpose is an important skill. And I guess the last thing is the ability to kind of see the world through Hillary Clinton's eyes enough to be able to understand, what it might feel like to, he lost elections. He knew what it felt like to lose an election. He also knew what it felt like to be ambitious and to want to be president. And I think he also had a sense of, what might be an offer that she would say yes to. So I think having that ability to kind of stand in somebody's shoes along the way, even as and frankly, the ability to stand in her shoes was one of the ways I think he won that election, because he was very adept at knowing who his opponents were, and he paid a lot of attention to them during what was a incredibly long primary.
And so great comments. Let's leave it there. We've come to the end of our time together. I want to thank Mike for a great discussion. I want to thank you all for being part of our Leadership Project event. We just minted 6 new leadership scholars at the College of Law. So we're going to be starting our Leadership Project again for the students next year. And we'll look forward to seeing you again at future Leadership Project events for alumni and friends around the world. Again, thanks to Mike Strautmanis for a great discussion, and thanks all for being here today. Have a great day.
Great. Thank you.